Here we are, somewhere deep in the burbs, well actually in a central city somewhere. You work it out. If you can find out where it is, I will give you my love. That's all you'll get. Okay, this week is National Reconciliation Week, and the theme is Walk Together with Courage. And I'll say the words again, walk together with courage. And you do need courage to take up the reconciliation task, or the reconciliation ball, which has been dropped so often in this country's history. Now, most Australians wouldn't even know what National Reconciliation Week is, as we don't actually really pay that much respect to Indigenous Australians, unless they're footballers or artists. But when it comes to the day-to-day lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, there's really not much interest, unless you can make a buck out of it as in tourism. Now, National Reconciliation Week is bookended by two exceptionally important days. National Sorry Day on the 27th of May and Mabo Day on the 3rd of June. And I'm not going to reiterate the history of this country in any long fashion, but just to give you a background. We had over 225 distinct groups of people in their own nation states, this country's First Nations people on the Australian continent and the islands surrounding this continent, who'd lived with the land for over 60,000 years. A continuous living culture of 60,000 years. From 1596, when the first recorded European contact occurred on the west coast of North Queensland, what we saw is different European powers eyeing off the continent to see whether they incorporated into their empires. We had the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, and finally the English. And on the 26th of January 1788, after Captain Cook had planted the British flag on the north part of North Queensland and claimed the whole east coast of Australia on behalf of the British monarchy, on the 26th of January 1788, we had approximately 1,400 convicts and their guards sent here to set up a penal colony. And that started one of the greatest tragedies that has ever been recorded on this planet. We have a distinct living culture of over 60,000 years, slowly, brutally wiped away. The further south you got, the more intensive the killing was, as the colonisers, who needed room for their sheep initially in their agricultural lands, wiped out human beings as if they were vermin. I mean, I'm not making it up, it's in the historical record. But what happened after that, in my opinion, is worse than the actual colonisation process, the brutality of the colonisation process, where men, women and children were killed, dispossessed, slaughtered so we could steal their lands. What happened after that? After that dispossession had reclaimed the whole continent and formed the Federation of Australia in 1901, we had an intense period where we as a people attempted to deny the origins of this land. We attempted to deny the inhabitants. We removed their children to integrate them assimilate them into Australian society so we could use their labour to work on their lands for nothing. It was quite a brutal, nasty business. And any of you who know what the drover's boy is, there was the ballads of the drover's boy. The drover's boy wasn't usually a boy, it was usually a young Aboriginal girl from 12 to 16 who was being sexually exploited by the drover. the euphemisms. So there are all these euphemisms as far as the massacres were concerned, the rapes, the dispossession. And by the time I was born in 1951, it had become part of our national folklore that Indigenous Australians would die out, that they had no connection to the land when we first came here. The land was uninhabited, Terra Nullius. Now during this period, every state had its Aboriginal Protection Board, which was a board which was basically set up to regulate every aspect of an individual's life, every single aspect. You couldn't move without getting permission, you couldn't leave the reserve without permission, you couldn't marry without permission, you couldn't form a relationship without permission, you couldn't... At the same time, we had this mass theft of children, which has caused a long-standing scar among Indigenous Australians, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, the mass theft of children. And these children were stolen so that we could erase any memories of a black Australia. They were to be force-fed the stories that were our stories, but they weren't good enough to be first-rate citizens. One of the first acts of the Federal Parliament in 1901 was to deny those Aboriginal people that had the vote in Tasmania and Victoria and South Australia the right to vote. One of the first acts of the Australian Parliament. So for 7 decades, we were blissfully unaware of this hidden history. It's a little bit like a rapist basically going to ground, starting a new family, starting a new life. A little bit like that, not taking any responsibility. We took no responsibility. But from the 1970s onwards, and my first year at university was 1970, University of Queensland, people began to understand that this country had a black history. Not the general population, not the mass media, not the Murdoch press, not the churches, but to a significant degree, radicals. The young people who'd been radicalised as a result of the Vietnam War in the 1960s and early 1970s began to form connections with Aboriginal people. The Communist Party in the 50s and 60s would form connections with Aboriginal people like the people at Wave Hill. Because at that particular time in the 60s and 70s, Aboriginal people were basically paid with tobacco and flour. They actually weren't paid wages. They were basically slave labour on their own lands. So when Rudd made his apology, I think it was in 2007, and let's remember, it was not an apology that was made on behalf of the Australian people. Mr. Rudd, understanding the resistance of Australian people to actually believe the evidence before their eyes of what had happened to Indigenous children and their mothers and fathers and families and extended families, gave the apology on behalf of himself as Prime Minister and on behalf of Parliament. He never used the word the Australian people, because there were huge sections of the Australian people who felt the apology was not needed, that the assimilation policies that occurred because we were trying to save these children from a fate worse than death. And obviously the dislocation which occurred, we see the consequences of that dislocation today in 2019 in many Indigenous communities, both regional and urban and in the countryside. At the same time, in 1982, Eddie Mabo was a gardener at the Queensland University. Just another Torres Strait Islander who'd been evicted from his islands. He'd been banned from the island of Mer, which he'd lived on all his life, because he showed a little bit of initiative and a little bit of courage and questioned the so-called government-appointed elders on that island. And for his troubles, he was banned from the island. And he was working in Townsville. He had a family of 5 to feed. He was mainly living off fish that they were catching, a little bit of income as a gardener at the University of Queensland. And during his lunchtime, he'd kind of wander into the library and look at the books. And by 1982, he realised that the legal fiction that was used to justify the theft of this land, Terra Nullius, was a lie. Because on his island of Muir, he could tell you exactly what was owned by his family. He could tell you where the fish traps were, where the boundaries were. And he got in touch with some of the academics at the University of Queensland who, were interested, radical activists, who took up the case. And during the height of the Bjelke-Petersen regime, for 10 years, they battled in the Supreme Court in Queensland to have the matter heard in Canberra. And eventually, after many manoeuvres by the Bjelke-Petersen government to stop this case going to the High Court, the case reached the High Court. Now, there were 3 people involved in the case, all from Muir. There was Eddie Mabo, there was Father Passy and Grandfather Rice, 3 generations. And they took the case to the High Court pro bono. It was taken to the High Court by a firm of Melbourne lawyers who felt that this was one way they could actually pay back Indigenous Australians for the theft that had occurred. And on the 3rd of June 1992, 5 months after Eddie Mabo had died of lung cancer, 5 months after, the High Court made the momentous decision that Indigenous Australians, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, had rights to land in law, and that their prior occupation of this land trumped the sovereign right of the British monarch. That their sovereignty continued to be important. There was consternation in 1992. Not only were the Aboriginal people going to take your backyard, they were going to take your hills hoist as well. Could you imagine that? You couldn't hang out your washing because dryers weren't that weren't a household item in those days. But that was the extent of the propaganda. Within 10 years of the 1992 judgment, over 20% of Australian land mass, to a large degree unproductive land, has been returned to Indigenous Australians under the Native Title Act. And native title cases continue to be heard in the courts, both regarding the land and the sea surrounding the continent and the islands to the north, have continued unabated. Now, native title has been watered down by successive federal governments. They have watered down this historic Mabo judgment because they are concerned about ownership. And if Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have rights to land in law because of their prior occupation, the issue of compensation rears its ugly head. Not just compensation for those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders living in regional areas, but compensation for urban Indigenous people. And to date, there has been no compensation. Now, a lot of people tend to downplay the significance of the Mabo decision. Without the Mabo decision, there'd be many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups that would actually not have control of their land. Without the Mabo decision, mining companies wouldn't have to negotiate with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders regarding mining on their property and royalties. Without native title, you would still have that legal fiction of Terra Nullius, which would regulate the legal relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Now, obviously, that's not the whole issue. Now, there's issues about sovereign rights, there's issues about compensation, there's issues about treaties or a treaty, and the Uluru Statement from the Heart highlighted many of these issues. There's the issue of truth-telling, there's the issue of people understanding what occurred and why so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities find themselves in such difficult situations in 2019. Now, my late wife, Ellen Jose, was a Torres Strait Islander who lived here in Melbourne for 40 years, and in 2002 there was a huge gathering of people here at Melbourne, at the Melbourne Town Hall, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the decision. And although Koiki Eddie Mabo was dead, his widow and children came to the celebration from the Torres Strait, from Townsville, sorry. Father Passy turned up, and I think even Grandfather Rice turned up. Huge celebrations in 2002, which was bankrolled to a significant degree by the Melbourne City Council. Now, what's happened since then is that Mabo Day, especially in the southern parts of Australia, has tended to disappear. And there's hardly any events which actually mark Mabo Day, although in the Torres Strait it is a public holiday. The Torres Strait Authority, which governs the Torres Strait, declared the 3rd of June a public holiday, and it continues to be a public holiday. Lest we cure this festering wound, we will never be a nation to be proud of.